It's lovely. Remain seated for our hymn number 159.
First reading this morning
is from the current issue of the Christian Century. The title is, Are We Safe Yet? In all the talk about raising the debt ceiling, three figures have not gotten much attention. $5.9 trillion spent on defense and nuclear weapons activities since 2000. Not counting the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. 1.36 trillion spent on these two wars, and 636 billion spent on homeland security through a number of different agencies. That comes close to a total of $8 trillion spent in the past decade for defense. Since 2000, the Pentagon budget has increased 44%, adjusted for inflation. Has your money funneled into the vast and shadowy world of military and national security spending made you safer? My second reading is the Charter of the United Nations. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom, and for these ends to practice tolerance and to live together in peace as good neighbors, to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, to ensure that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest, to employ international machinery in the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all people, have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims. The relentlessness of war weighs heavily on me lately, as I'm sure it does on you. This past, over 8 years, the longest period of continuous war in American history. These are the times that try our souls. Is war just inevitably, just inexorably our lot as human beings on this earth? We see the needless waste of all the earnest young people, men and women, who want to serve their country and whose hearts leap to the call of patriotic duty, some with their eyes fully open, some less clear about the interests, some insidious interests that may lie beneath any armed conflict, but all of them, nevertheless, required to inflict suffering which from that moment on will burden their hearts and spirits, weighing them down to the ends of their lives. And we're coming increasingly to understand what a burden that can be for our returned service people. That is, of course, if they physically survive themselves, if they themselves are not maimed or killed. The point I want to make here is not that you should agree with me that these have been unwarranted and unjust wars, but rather that whatever our respective views on these wars, neither you nor I may enjoy the luxury of exempting ourselves from moral responsibility for them. Those who oppose them should oppose them vigorously and publicly. Those who support them should make the very best case that can be made in their support. But either way, just or unjust, these wars, any war, is an extravagant display of our inhumanity, an extravagant display of the human ability to rationalize utterly irrational behavior, an extravagant display of the limits of whatever civilization we've been able to achieve over the years. No way to get around it. You and I, along with everyone else on the face of the earth, cannot separate ourselves from this long caravan of human folly, down through the years, defiling this lush paradise, this Eden which somehow miraculously we were given to enjoy, not to destroy and to destroy each other, but to inhabit as the peaceable kingdom where lion and lamb lie down together in the pleasure of each other's company. What can possibly remediate this folly? What, if anything, have we come up with to give humaneness and civilization a better chance? Well, let me offer this. It's the only thing I can think of or have ever been able to think of that is potentially up to the task. It is at the core of our best national and international political vision, and remarkably, it is at the core of our free faith, the organizing principle of the Unitarian Universalist tradition. Not that we have this to offer only, or that we own it or have a corner on it in any way, but that we have nevertheless charged ourselves specifically over the years to represent and cultivate in the world. But let me step back a bit. We here are citizens of a country which set out some years ago on a great experiment. It was understood from the beginning to be an experiment, a great social and political experiment. Lincoln called it the last best hope of earth. Ours is a country which, however short of the mark we may have fallen, set out deliberately and nobly to test the possibilities of democracy, to test whether this, as Lincoln put it, whether this nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated could long endure, could ever embody these possibilities of democracy. The Civil War was a time of great testing of that experiment. We are, I believe, as I suggested a couple of Sundays ago, at another point of great testing. Now, actually, much greater, as it now involves our being and acting as a nation directly in the whole world. At stake is survival of a sustainable, humane world. And we may not make it. Nevertheless, and this is a basic tenet both of democracy and of Unitarian Universalism, nevertheless, the future is open. From this day forward, each day, we may begin our history anew, and we affirm in our liberal faith that we human beings have the capacity to realize the future that we can imagine. The answer to war, then, the answer to the rape of the earth, the answer to every great impediment today to human progress comes ringing down to us in this dream of democracy. During all the years, the world has struggled in these bonds of our own demonic devising. Human beings have at the same time been at work, lo here, lo there, all over the world. The United States certainly has no corner on it, though we do have the greatest resources of any single country to bring to bear upon its realization. All this while in the world's struggles, human beings have been at work, gradually sifting out all of this morbid chaos, an ever-fresh vision of humanity, trying to find within it the essential elements of this new spirit of human possibility. This new spirit was formed out of many influences. It was formed out of the great Hebrew tradition of law, justice, and national integrity, out of the deep human sympathy of the Christian impulse, the gospel of unconditional love, the good news of the dignity and worth of even the least of these, my brethren, the meek of the earth, along with those of great accomplishment who are not necessarily meek, but are nevertheless humble in the spirit of the common good. The singular sense that we share in a common lot with all persons of every walk, of every station. This new spirit was formed as well out of the great humanist genius of the ancient Greek social and political imagination. It was kept alive even during the dark ages of authoritarianism and in pockets of persistent rebellion and renewal, and then revived and flowered afresh in the Enlightenment, then written into a fundamental shift in civil rights and civil liberties in the history of England, into our national experiment here in America, and then in parallel movements in France and elsewhere, and even today, now, in the Arab Spring. Democracy. Not American democracy for Americans, and not American democracy for the world, but a pure and universal democracy. The democratic vision as a faith for the world. The spirit of democracy as a transcendent, countervailing influence in the world, seeking to remake and renew and progressively civilize a world of chaos and conflict which seems amenable for resolution only in violence. Seen in light of this countervailing spirit working in and through everything, we might well raise the question of whether our idea of the church is large enough. Is the church only the local congregation? Or might we see the church as a larger community of faith in which we participate, which takes many forms, with which we here in the Beverly Unitarian Church are in some direct sense allied? Other local congregations, of course, but also perhaps groups of local neighbors committed to each other's welfare and working through their issues together. Many of us are involved in such organizations. Are they not, in a clear sense, a form of the church of democracy? Or the various impressive groups at work, Palestinians and Israelis both, groups struggling to build bridges between their hostile peoples. Or groups like the Southsiders for Peace, who gather not as Unitarian Universalists, or as Episcopalians, or as Roman Catholics, or Jews, but as those whose truest identity and vocation is to cultivate together the humanization of our common world. I'm expressing a deeply universalist Unitarian perspective here. Unity in diversity. We are all one people, and only as one people acting in mutual affection, not only in respect, but affection. As you know, we're all filial beings, and if we open ourselves to our filial being, it's actually not that hard to love one another. If by love we mean mutual appreciation and compassion, only as one diverse people seeking to embody that oneness in some unified, diverse whole can we begin adequately to address and counter our propensity to assert ourselves over others, to compete for personal or national advantage, to settle our disputes by force and violence. The democratic vision of the liberal faith offers a fundamental alternative, that we settle conflicts and embody new possibilities for community, not through polarization and authoritarianism, but through mutuality and openness, not through coercion, but through persuasion, and that we try not to expunge our diversity, but embrace and celebrate it as enriching everyone. This is the fundamental theory of the democratic vision. And lo, remarkably, also the fundamental theory of our particular free religious tradition. So I'm suggesting that we have a very particular and substantial stake in it and a responsibility for its future. Let me put this in clearer Unitarian Universalist perspective. In our own history, we look back to the New England Puritan theocratic idea, the vision of the city of God built as a light set on a hill to display the new society, which, under God's authority and direction, according to this understanding, were actually, we are actually or would actually be able to create. Now, over the years, under the influence of the Enlightenment, of deists like Jefferson and Franklin, under the influence of pluralism, the actual diversity of our country, and special interest to us Unitarian Universalists under the influence of the increasing liberalizing of the New England churches, this Puritan vision of a society ruled by God gradually became a progressive democratic idea, a spiritual vision of a free and just society of equals, accessible to everyone, governing themselves together. Now, this more open vision of the spirit of democracy at work in the world was deeply influenced by the emergence of our own free faith within the New England Puritan tradition. The Unitarian heresy, the commitment to a universal salvation, a salvation not limited to a Puritan elect, and by Unitarian lights, not authoritarian and not rigidly stratified. Bear in mind that in colonial New England, and keep this is, we tend to forget that in colonial New England, the parish was the whole town. Every citizen belonged to the parish church, which in turn served as the heart and conscience of the community life. With the emergence of separation of church and state, however, this changed. Membership in the church came to be based not on the givenness of one's citizenship, but on personal conversion and personal choice. The church became a separate association of believers, and as a result, its purpose then tended toward serving its own members and its own interests rather than the larger community per se. Accordingly, its influence shifted from the center of the community out to the edges, and we see that in somewhat radical terms in our present situation. In our time, we tend to think of ourselves not as leaven working at the center of the whole loaf, but way off in the left margin, a kind of niche church representing a point of view even outside the box entirely. So the question is, what might our churches become if we were to retrieve that earlier understanding of the parish as the whole community? Perhaps the parish as the whole world. Such a democratic hope and a universal vision needs a church to cultivate and advocate this democratic faith. To build such a church today, we would need to grasp this universal democratic idea that claims all human beings everywhere to a shared purpose and promise. The idea may seem to be only a fond hope, but it's not a pipe dream. Consider, for example, just the events in South Africa in recent decades. The remarkable figure of Nelson Mandela, his sacrifice and his extraordinary graciousness in the face of national inhumanity. In Mandela, in his people, in that whole spirit, we see an actual incarnation of the transcendent, universal, democratic idea. And we see a new order emerging in an old and corrupt place, which this fresh spirit could and did actually build. Now, this is the spirit to which we of the democratic faith bear witness, which we celebrate, we advocate, which we seek to cultivate. And as long as it works among us, we are not fated to futility and despair. We need not retreat from the great challenges of our times. Our greatest challenges, including preeminently war, can be defeated to the extent that we are able to embody the ends of peace, justice, and sustainability with democratic and peaceful means. As long as this spirit works among us, we are liberated to hope and dream and act together for a greater future within our own communities, primarily, of course, because that's where we can most effectively work, but also in spirit within the global village. Any organized effort to say yes to this spirit, to encourage it, to extend its influence in the structures and institutions of our world, is, I would say, the ministry of the true church of democracy. It is committed to nothing more fundamental than the deep and comprehensive purposes of a whole, inclusive, unified, just world for all. Let's join together now in a time of meditation as I offer some words, and then we'll have a few moments of silence. This time we spend together stands in commanding relationship to our soul's health. The world we think we know is forever passing. Things grow strange, yet not all things are strange. The love that unites us stands fast. Our moments of inspiration retain their luster. The encouragement we give to one another is undiminished in its effect. The hopes we share are, as always, the source of our grace to make new beginnings and to persevere. The mystery and wonder of renewal remain active in our lives. The wisdom not to over-magnify our burdens or underestimate our blessings does abide in us. So amidst all that is transient, there we would affirm all that is lasting. May we fully know how much our own lives are built upon the lives and labors, the compassion and sacrifice and suffering of others, both present and past. And may we thereby know the full experience and fruit of community. Community which cuts through the exclusiveness and false pride that separate us. Community that gathers up each into the inclusive, organic whole we are meant to be, not to erase our individuality, but to enable each of us to contribute our unique gifts to the fuller and richer expression of the humanity we share. Amen. extinguish our chalice, and we say together, carry the flame of peace and love